have so many questions. Show me the answers. I'm afraid. Why am I here? What's the point? Should I go? Welcome back, everyone, to An Ordinary Search for Truth. My name is Nate, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my simple technique for overcoming resistance and suffering as it arises in your everyday experience. I've found that a lot of times I will go through certain situations or experiences and then look back on it and think, man, like, why did I react in this way? Why did I do this? Why didn't I just respond with more compassion or more acceptance? And ultimately, it comes down to in the moment, you were confronted with resistance or some sort of suffering. And, thinking about it reflexively was not doing me any good because then the next time that the situation would come up, there I was once again faced with this resistance and not having a plan in place when it arose to deal with it. I was always looking at it after the fact. So, this is a very effective technique that I can't really say that I've developed because I'm sure there are other people that are using this general technique. I'm just passing this on to you to try implementing into your life to see if you see results, to see if it helps you deal with resistance and suffering in a better way. And I'm not saying that it will solve it immediately or even within several weeks or several months. This is something that can take a lot of time to do. And the amount of time that it takes really depends upon how dedicated you are to employing this practice, how much awareness that you cultivate to be able to recognize resistance as it arises in your experience. It also takes a certain element of patience because our mind's programming is very deep, very complex, and these patterns and habits that we have in response to resistance and suffering are very deeply set, very deeply held. We develop these at a very young age, and it's part of our survival mechanism. But there is a certain point where these survival mechanisms are not actually helping us. In fact, they're hurting us and causing a great deal of suffering. So I'm going to go through what the steps are, and then I'm going to walk you through just kind of an imaginary situation where we could employ this, and so that you can kind of see the breakdown of what it actually looks like in an actual real life situation. So, the first thing that I need to address is that most of the suffering that you experience, and I'm not talking necessarily about pain, I'm talking about suffering, which is more psychological, more emotional. It deals with the thoughts and the emotions and them as a unit reacting off of one another. This is what I'm referring to when I say suffering. The majority of the suffering that you experience is a direct result of resisting reality in some way. When we resist what is happening, what is, we basically are creating this imagined reality, this concept of what we think that life should be. And then we're comparing it to what life actually is, what reality is actually presenting to us. And we see these two as at odds. Our imagined reality is the best one for us to have the best possible survival, the best possible happiness, the least discomfort possible. This is the imagined reality. And when actual reality doesn't live up to that, we resist that because we think, oh, if only it was this way, if only it could be different than how it is, and we develop this resistance inside of us. And over time, When we respond to similar situations in a similar way, this resistance becomes habitual. We habitually resist situations in our life that arise that are typically uncomfortable or difficult and challenging, that don't agree with our beliefs or our worldviews. So I think that it would be very hard to find somebody that doesn't experience resistance in some form and who also doesn't experience suffering as a result of that. This whole video is going to help you overcome this. And like I said, it's four basic steps that I've kind of broken it down into. So let's jump right into it. The first technique is train yourself to recognize resistance as it arises in your direct experience. So, not after the fact. That's very easy to do, to look back and see the situations where you resisted things. But actually noticing it when it happens is very difficult to do because automatically these habitual processes and patterns want to just take over. That's their job. We're in this situation. I need to jump in, resist this to maintain my comfort, my survival, to protect myself from something mental or emotional or physical. So, how do we train ourselves to recognize resistance as it happens? Well, it is a little bit difficult at the start, but it gets easier and easier. There's different areas that reflect resistance when it happens. The first area is in the physical body. When you are experiencing resistance, a lot of times you will feel it in the body in some way. Whether there's tightness of your muscles or your gut, restriction of the muscles. There's all sorts of ways that it can present itself physically. But generally, it's kind of a uncomfortable feeling. When you're in a state of resistance, it doesn't feel good most of the time. And so when resistance arises within your experience, whatever it is, it can be very small to large things and levels of resistance. When you feel resistance, just take a moment to notice, wow, like I'm resisting this experience right now, and this is what it feels like. Really just tune in deeply to what that feels like in the body. Familiarize yourself with this. Become very clearly conscious of how resistance arises in your body for you, what it feels like, what it does to you. The second thing is take a look at what mental talk is happening when you're experiencing this resistance. What kinds of things is your mind saying? I'll give you a hint. A good way to know that you're in a state of resistance is very similar to way back in my earlier videos with the blue background. I don't know if you remember those, but I did several episodes on expectations and how to notice them when they're happening. Resistance is very, very similar to this. You can recognize resistance mental talk when your mind is saying things like, this should have been this way. So, should have is a big one. I could have, or they could have done whatever. Could have is a good one. So, should have, could have, those are big indicators that you are resisting something. Similar talk might be, I wish that they would just stop doing this or stop saying this. I wish. If only this wasn't the case. This kind of talk. These are just a few examples. But it's going to be unique to you. It's going to be very unique to your own mental talk that happens. And most of the time, you don't even recognize that it's happening. So when you start getting in tune with what resistance feels like in your body, Your body is reflecting what your mind state is currently doing. And the things that your mind is saying at the time about the situation are influencing how you physically feel and that physical feeling of resistance that you have. So, the second thing is to get in touch with what your mental talk surrounding different situations are when you feel resistance. And these can play off of one another. You can notice mental talk before you notice physical phenomena. You, I typically notice physical phenomena before the mental talk. It's kind of I feel it in the body, and then I go to my mind and I realize, oh, okay, there's resistance thought going on. That's how it works for me, but you might be the opposite. And the last thing is to get in touch with and kind of learn your own coping strategies that you have developed in response to resistance. So this is a little bit more after the fact. So definitely the mental talk and physical feeling is primary. But a good secondary way to notice that you're in resistance is a little bit after the fact. What actions, what speech, what body language do you encapsulate when you're in resistance or trying to get out of it? What what is your typical reaction? What are these habitual patterns that take place? For me, when I feel resistance, I typically get really quiet because my mind is saying a lot of things that I don't want said out loud. So I get really quiet, and I really get this tightness in my stomach, sometimes a tightness in my chest. I will turn away from whatever it is that I'm resisting. I'll try to kind of like get out of it, back out of it, turn away from it. These are things that my body does that I've noticed are a response to resistance. So get in tune with those for yourself. Train yourself to recognize resistance as it arises. That's the first step. That is cultivating awareness of what's happening as it's happening. Don't just do it retroactively. Really try to catch yourself in the moment. That's where the transformation and the change happens, is right as it's happening. So that's very important. When you develop this skill of recognizing resistance within you as it's happening, pretty soon it will be very difficult for you to not recognize resistance when it's happening. It will be so obvious that it will feel like there's an alarm going off in your body and in your mind. You know, you'll feel that, and it'll immediately spark you into recognizing it as resistance. Okay, I'm resisting this situation right now. And the quicker you can notice it, the better off you'll be. So go ahead and practice that in your daily life. Spend a week on it, spend a couple weeks on it. Really put yourself in all sorts of different situations and your daily life, and really work on trying to recognize when this resistance is arising, what situations, what people, what environments, what times. What have you eaten or not? When do these resistance situations arise? Really familiarize yourself with when these situations arise and your response to them. Once you've cultivated this, it's time to move on to the second step of dealing with resistance in the moment. So resistance arises because, like I said, we have this imagined reality and then actual reality that we are comparing. So what you'll want to do is investigate this imagined reality that you think is superior. What you'll want to do is trace your thought patterns back to what I like to call the source thought or the source belief from which this resistance is arising. What is the key concept that your mind is holding on to that is at odds with what is actually happening in reality? Once you discover that, whatever that is, you can begin to examine it. Really explore, is this thought based on a God perspective, a selfless perspective, a universal, uniting, compassionate, loving place? Or is it coming from an ego based, selfish, survival kind of place? These are two different places to be coming from. When you do trace whatever this source thought or source belief is to its most fundamental and you look at it, you'll realize that it's not based on this higher understanding, this unitive understanding. It's probably a very um, closed, selfish, ego-centered thing. So the whole purpose of our spiritual path, of our transformation, is becoming less selfish and less ego-centered and more selfless and love-centered. Unconditional love. Unconditional love does not resist anything. There are no conditions upon the love. It is given freely at all times, in all places, to all things. So that's where we're progressing toward. It's very important to go back to this source thought or belief that ultimately is untrue and it's not serving you. At one point, your mind thought that it would serve you and help you survive and help you climb the social ladder and be materialistically wealthy and get rid of your discomfort. But at the same time, when that was created, it actually creates this habitual pattern of discomfort each time that this thought or belief is confronted with reality and is at odds with reality. So that's the second step, and that can be a very difficult thing. But once you do it a few times, really deeply and really honestly, it will become easier because you'll start to recognize similar source thoughts and source beliefs from which your resistance is arising from. You'll start to see that there's a pattern to it, and you'll become familiar with these beliefs and thoughts, and you'll recognize them over and over again as being untrue or not serving you anymore. And that brings us to the third step, which for me was probably the hardest step. The third step is to bring in this element of compassion toward the source thought, source belief, and resistance that you are feeling. To really feel genuine compassion for it. Instead of what I did for a long time, which was resisting the resistance. It was an impossible cycle where resistance would arise in my experience, and I would recognize, oh, this is resistance. I don't want resistance. This isn't serving me. This isn't helping me. This is egoic and selfish. I don't want this. And immediately, a new resistance was born. The third step is the most important toward trying to transform your resistant thought patterns and emotional patterns, is have compassion for it. This was a lesson that took me a long time to learn, that there's no need to fight the mind, because the separate self, the you, the ego that you imagine that you are, is a creation of the mind. And so when you try to fight the mind, when you try to control the mind and stop the resistance thoughts and stop all of this stuff, you're in an endless cycle within your own mind. It's your mind fighting against itself, and this can create incredible disharmony and discomfort, and it's ultimately fruitless. You will get nowhere doing this. To fight your own mind with your mind is an unwinnable battle. And So the way that I found that best helped with this was not to start to think of the mind as being evil or malicious or out to get you, or this horrible thing that you're stuck with that you have to fight against and fix, which for me for a long time was how I viewed it. But instead, I found that it's better to look at it as your mind is kind of like a software program that's doing its best to keep you alive and keep you happy. It's doing its best. It's really trying. It's trying all the time to do what is best for you. But the only problem is that the mind has limits. It has things that it can do and things that it can't do. It can't do it all. And when you're trying to access source or reality, infinite truth, infinite love, when you're trying to access these things and embody these things, that is a place that the mind can't go. And it's not the mind's fault. It's just the way that it is. The mind only functions in limits and boundaries, definitions, objects, the finite, and is incapable of understanding the infinite. But that doesn't mean that it's an evil, malicious thing. It really is doing its best. And so I found that the best way to approach it is to view your mind like a young child who is most of the time, scared of the world. It's so small and so fragile, and it's doing its best to learn and grow and improve and survive the best that it can. But it's still just kind of a young child. And the best thing to do when this young child makes a mistake is to sit down with sit down with it and have this space of compassion and understanding and love, and say, you know what, you're doing your best. I appreciate you for doing your best. And together we'll get through this. Together we'll find a way to work in harmony with one another. And so that was really the best way that I found to deal with it, was when my mind would trip up and resist and get into old patterns, I would respond to it as I would a young innocent child, because really that's very much what it is like. And bring a whole lot of compassion and love and patience. Embrace this part of you. Embrace this function of the mind that feels that it needs to resist things in order to do what's best for you. Understand that that's a mistake that your mind made, but it's a valid one, and at some point probably served you, but that it's no longer needed, and it's time to move past it. So bringing this compassion is absolutely essential to overcoming resistance once and for all. Because when faced with love and compassion, resistance and fear cannot stay. It's like turning on the light in a dark room. The darkness cannot stay. It is erased by the light. So this is the step that you should probably spend the most time on, and will probably be the most difficult, because we see the suffering that is caused by our resistance, and we don't want that suffering. And it's very easy to formulate these negative emotions and thoughts about what is causing our suffering, which a lot of times we'll just pin on our mind. Say, well, it's the mind's fault that I'm in this situation. It's the mind's fault that I can't just accept everything. But that's not going to help you. Best to approach it from a place of love and compassion. Which then brings us to the final step, which is a natural evolution of the third, to finally, after becoming aware of your resistance and your mind that is creating it, after tracing it back to your root thought, your root belief that is causing this resistance, you can then add compassion and understanding and love to it, And then finally, once you have loved the crap out of it, you can release it. You can allow that resistance to leave because it's no longer helping you, it's no longer serving you, and you've proved to your mind that. So now the mind will be a whole lot more willing to say, okay, okay, I will let this go. I'll release the fist, as it were, and stop resisting this situation. And the source thought and the source belief that you've identified will slowly fade away. This is probably the easiest step because, like I said, it's just a natural flowing from the third, from this compassion and this love that you can cultivate inside yourself and direct toward your resistance. After doing that, your resistance will almost always just immediately fall away. The more you do it, the quicker your resistance will fall away. The mind will less frequently and less strongly resist these trigger situations or objects or people that you find yourself in. And when those arise, you'll have a softer reaction to it. You'll have a softer resistance, a more subtle one. And go through the cycle again and again, the process again and again, every day, as often as you can remember. Go through this process. And in time, you will wake up one day and realize that there is nothing that you are trying to resist, that there's nothing worth resisting, that everything is absolutely worthy of your love and your acceptance and your compassion, rather than your resistance and your fear and trying to fight it. You'll come to realize that reality is absolutely perfect, harmonious, and loving, and that it is doing exactly what needs to be done, exactly when it needs to be done, not just for you, but for everyone. And that at the end of the day, resistance only exists inside of your mind. You actually create it. You accept beliefs and thoughts that are untrue or do not coincide with reality. And then when they are at odds with reality, the resistance arises and it creates suffering. It's an endless cycle, a habitual cycle, but it doesn't have to be. You can absolutely escape out of the cycle. But first you have to be aware that this is what's happening, and then you need to identify what the source of this is. And after identifying that, you can then direct compassion and love toward it. And finally, the resistance will be let go. You can let go of the resistance and surrender to reality. And you'll find, I'm sure, that your suffering will decrease dramatically. And your feelings of gratitude and love will increase dramatically, which is ultimately what the spiritual path is about, right? That's what we're aiming to do. But we can't just do it up here and after the fact. We actually have to get in the trenches, and as these situations arise, we need to address them immediately. The quicker you address it, the more important you are telling your mind that this is. Your mind is very quickly responding to situations in order to protect you. So you need to be just as quick, just as alert in recognizing this and implementing a very conscious, very loving process to it in order to grow and change. So that's the process. I hope that I explained it well enough for you. So now we're going to go through just a very brief example of what this could possibly look like in a certain situation. Let's go to a place where I think a lot of people experience resistance on a daily basis, and that is traffic. A lot of us are involved in transportation, getting to work, school, home, whatever. And part of that is there's usually traffic, especially if you're in a more populated area. If you're out on the country roads, this might not apply to you, but it definitely applies to me and a lot of people I know. So you're stuck in traffic, right? You've been zooming along, you've left your house, you've been on the easy streets, and now you get to the busy ones, and it's row to row cars. The stoplights just seem to be taking forever. You're sitting in your car all alone, listening to music or whatever you do, and all of a sudden you start feeling inside of you this anxiety, this resistance, this discomfort, maybe anger, irritation. So let's say that you've been exposed to this content before and you know the process that you need to take in order to handle this. You feel all of these things in your body, this tightness, this discomfort, this irritation, and your mind starts churning and saying, gosh, this traffic, man, like, why can't it be moving faster? Why can't these lights be going faster? Why am I always stuck in this traffic day after day? It's not even rush hour right now. Why is it so busy? This is ridiculous. I should have gone this other way. It's probably less busy. I could have done this, blah, 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 blah. So the mind starts churning and these thoughts start coming up. So you recognize this. You recognize I've got these feelings in my body. My mind is taking over and creating this narrative and this commentary about this situation. And so what do? Well, you've done the first step already. You've identified that resistance is happening. You can recognize it. And so it's time to move to step 2. Trace back to the root belief, the root thought from which this is arising. Why do you care? Why are you resisting this situation as opposed to some other situation? Why is this one really getting at you? So you might look inward and think, well, I want to get to where I'm going, and I want to be there now. I don't want to be here in this traffic. I would rather be somewhere else. You think, well, why? Why? Why is the big question, by the way. That's when you're doing this tracing back. Why is a huge question that will help you do this. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking these things? And you can keep asking why until you get to the bottom, to the root. Well, why am I feeling this way in the traffic? Because I would rather be somewhere else, and I feel like this traffic is unnecessary. That if there was some way to avoid it, I would rather that. And so why? And it's like, well, because because I just I don't like being somewhere that I don't want to be for no reason. And you can keep doing this and just really question yourself and really evaluate what your thoughts are thinking and where this resistance is coming from. Maybe you've had so many past experiences, bad experiences around this situation that it just brings all of that past back up. So this will be different for each situation when you do this investigation into what the source is. And really, at the end of the day, the source is that you think that you need to get where you're going more than anyone else needs to get where they're going. That you are the most important person in that traffic, and that if there was a way for everybody else to just have some different way of getting to where they need to go that would make your path the best and the quickest and the easiest, then that's what you want. So here we've arrived. Oh, I believe that I'm more important than everyone else and that I shouldn't have to be subjugated to traffic. And so you get down to there and you realize, wow, that's pretty selfish. It's pretty egocentric of me. Obviously, all these other people are trying to get where they're going too. We're all trying to get somewhere, and we're limited to being in cars on roads, and these roads have certain capacities, and that's just the way it is. You'll get to this point where you realize, wow, this is really selfish. I believe that where I'm going and my journey is more important than anything else. Guess what? Every single person in all these other cars are thinking the exact same thing. So who's most important? Are you? Or is everyone? So once you've identified that this resistance is arising from a very selfish place rather than a loving and accepting place, obviously, you can then implement the third step, which is respond to that with compassion and love. Don't just be like, wow, I'm so selfish. I'm such a selfish, terrible person. My gosh, how dare I? Instead of going that route, instead be like, wow, okay, I recognize this within myself, and I'm not angry about this. And try to cultivate this feeling of compassion and acceptance and love for that feeling. Just be like, okay, I accept that this is how I'm feeling and I know why, and that's okay. But I don't want to keep feeling this. I don't want this to happen every time I'm in traffic anymore. I want to be able to, no matter what, get to work just as happy as when I left my house, right? I don't want my drive to ruin this for me anymore. And so once you've identified what's happening and directed compassion toward it, just take a deep breath. Just a deep, relaxing breath. Release the tension in your body and let go. Let go of the resistance that you have. Don't let go of the steering wheel, but let go of the resistance and just accept that the resistance was a habitual thing that is part of you, but you're choosing to respond differently this time. You now are aware of all the other drivers and you recognize that they're in the same situation as you are and feel compassion for them and start to feel grateful for what you do have. You have a car that can get you to work. You have roads that you didn't have to make. You are leaving a home. You're leaving a place that keeps you sheltered from the storm. You're going to some place, whether it's work or school or whatever, that is going to add to your life and your happiness in some way. You start being grateful for the bigger picture and kind of pulling out your perspective. And when you do that, it's hard to continue resisting. It's really hard. Like, you have to try to continue resisting that situation after going through this series of steps. And that's just an example. There are countless of them. When I started doing this work, I didn't realize just how much of my experience I was resisting. I had no idea until I cultivated this kind of alarm system in my body to go off when I was resisting, and it was going off all the time. I was like, oh my goodness, like I have so much that I'm resisting. And I just went through this process. Every single time it came up, I would go through this process again and again and again and again and again and again until literally all of this resistance started melting away. All of this self created suffering just started leaving, just disappearing. And I experienced this peace and this love and this kind of groundedness that no matter what my experience or situation I was in, I was able to then approach it from a less selfish and ego driven place and more of a selfless and love driven place, recognizing the bigger picture rather than my limited little personal views. And so, this is what I would love to have happen for you. I would love for you to experience what it's like to not experience this resistance so much and feel that just discomfort and not good feeling inside of you. And you can do that. It's habitual right now, and at the start, it's really hard to start doing this. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the more you do it, the easier it is until you're clearing resistance every single day. I want that for you. So I made this video to share it with you, and I hope that you've picked up some valuable things here and that perhaps this might help you in your quest to become more unconditionally loving, less selfish, and being able to accept and love reality as it is rather than trying to fight it all the time. It's a tiring fight, and just in the end, at the end of the day, it just causes you suffering by doing so. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to leave a comment down below, I would love to hear from you. Go ahead and comment different things that you maybe are experiencing as you go through this process, or things that you hope that this process could maybe help you with. Or if you've gone through something similar in your life, I would love to hear about that. And lastly, leave a like if you enjoy what I'm doing, and subscribe if you want to be notified for further videos as they're released. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Don't worry, I've got a lot more content for you to enjoy. Click the link to the right to see a video that goes hand in hand with what you just watched. On the left is a playlist I recommend you check out. And down below you can see my latest video release. Your support means the world to me, so thank you.